next on Two Counselors and a Mic.
You know, he talked about students and he said, tell me which student out of this entire group is going to make it. Who is it that I should focus on and pay attention to and embrace? Which student? Show me which one it is, and I will go and put all my eggs in that basket. And if you can't do that right now, then I'm going to help every single student here and be here for every single student.
Thanks for landing on our podcast, where we use the power of our collective stories to make change in the world by expanding our understanding of who we are and how we learn.
We're a podcast dedicated to exploring the ever-changing topics related to education.
My name is Lisa Johnson Davis, and I am a counselor focusing on how we learn.
And my name is Gabriela Baeza Delgado. I am a counselor interested in maximizing our collective ideas to support all students. Welcome back to Two Counselors and a Mic. I'm Gabby.
And I'm Lisa. Thanks for landing on our podcast. In this podcast, we will feature Gabe Ogilvie, who I had the privilege of working with at High Tech High Chula Vista.
So I've heard a lot about Gabe, Lisa. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting him just yet. So I'm looking forward to actually seeing him in our Zoom and hearing from him. You've always shared some really kind words about Gabe. So I'm sure it'll be a treat for myself and our listeners. So I'm excited. Before we bring on Gabe, I've heard you a couple times mention your previous experience with High Tech High and what a beautiful experience you did have there and how you really did grow as a professional and even personally in the 7 years I think you were there. And so I got to thinking, because Gabe has that same background, I was thinking, sometimes people instill these seeds in us or a spark and it sticks with us. And for you, maybe that was at High Tech High, I don't know, or it could have been in your previous positions that you've had. But I'm just wanting to get your thoughts on, sometimes we meet people, especially in expanded learning, in that particular field, we meet people that start off thinking, this is just going to be a job while I get through school, and then I'm going to move on to do something else. And some people, that one position in expanded learning really changes the course that then they follow. And they might land in teaching, or they might land in counseling, or they might land at another nonprofit. And some leave. Some say, oh no, I don't really enjoy working with kids all that much. And so they go a different path, which is, again, that's fine, because we want people to find their true passion and a journey that fits them. So I'm just curious, I want to get your feedback. What was it like for you in your experiences? Can you recall a time or a specific, was it a person or an experience that you had where something was planted in you and that just has stuck and never left you? Did it kind of like you got a bug and it's just kind of been a part of who you are?
Oh my gosh, Gabby. So I immediately think about when I was in, I think it was 4th grade, and I was at one of our local elementary schools, Sunnyside Elementary. Shout out to Sunnyside. And I had the opportunity where we would get kind of pulled out into a classroom. And so we went to this classroom, and in this classroom was like this treasure trove of curiosities is all I can say. And I know it's probably in my mind, I've made it to be bigger than it is, but it had, books. It had like these little things where you could learn about Bigfoot or aliens or all the, weird things, puzzles in one, games in the other. And we would get an hour, and it was so unstructured. We would just be able to follow our curiosity. And I think that has probably been one of those things that I've always kind of carried with me. And so it's not necessarily a person, but having that experience of being able to go into this learning environment where it's so unstructured and it's like, try anything. Mm-hmm. And I think that was kind of an interesting way to bridge kind of Gabe and our work in expanded learning, because for me, I worked with Gabe actually for 7 years. I was with High Tech High Chula Vista for almost 10, but we had the luxury of starting out as kind of founding administrators at myself, High Tech High Chula Vista, and he was a founding administrator at our K-8. And we both came to expanded learning, not seeking out expanded learning. And for me, when I think about that expanded learning environment, it is a treasure trove of curiosities. It's not only that for students, but for myself. And I think that's probably a piece that I share with Gabe.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how those things stick, right? We can't shake them. And it's almost like once we've gotten a taste for something that we really like, and you think, oh, I really like that, I want more. And it just whether we move or change positions or our titles change over time, there's some things that are just kind of inherently now a part of our new DNA, so to speak. And, in hearing you share that, I think, because I've been asked, well, why did you land in education, or how'd that happen? And I think back to, honestly, when I was first starting out, it actually was as a teacher assistant position. And it just happened to be that they dispatched me to different expanded learning programs. And they said, oh, you need to do lessons on gang prevention, drug prevention. I said, oh, okay. I never really had done any of that work before. My brain wasn't even fully developed. I mean, I was probably like 20 some years old. I was still in my own journey of growth. I'm like, oh my God, here I am tasked with developing all these lessons for kids. But when I was in there, I realized, oh my goodness, all of these teachings that I've had, that I've been exposed to. I know we've had Mr. Daly, my previous 5th and 6th grade teacher. It's like I could hear his voice when I'd have a kid that was acting out, and Mr. Daly would be really tough, but still loving. I caught myself doing the same thing of like, I'm going to check you, but I'm really glad that you're here. And so I would try to create this balance. And so it wasn't until many years later that I realized I'm a product of all of these people and ideas that have been implanted and that I've been exposed to throughout my journey. So when I think back to when I would do these lessons, I mean, I'd show up with a boombox because we were going to talk about commercials that I had videotaped, or not videotaped, actually use a cassette tape to record. Remember those days where it was an actual cassette tape? Yeah. So I'd bring that, and, the kids were like, oh, what's this lady doing? And I would try to do things that were fun and interactive. But when I think, where did that come from? It didn't come from any formal training. I hadn't had that yet. I realized where it came from me was all the people that came before me that were a part of my story that planted those ideas. And so, trying to be creative and supportive. And when I would facilitate all my girl groups, I think, well, it wasn't because I myself went through a lot of girl groups growing up, but when I was facilitating, I was tapping into all of the different facilitation skills that had been role modeled for me. And so, that's what I was really trying to get to, is some things stick. And even though roles have changed over time and titles have changed, I still feel like I'm still that same person when I first started out, of trying to build connections, trying to always practice good listening skills and be that natural counselor that was there way before I had the formal training and credential. And to be very honest with you, I don't think I'm alone. And when I say that, when I went through that master's program and counseling program, I didn't walk out of there when I finished thinking, oh, this made me this great counselor. It reinforced a lot of skills that had been building over time. And, it gave me the theoretical framework, of course, but a lot of the skills that I had naturally been practicing were embedded by all these folks that were giving that to me. Like, they were pouring all of that into me. And that's where teaching really happened. It didn't necessarily happen by regurgitating things in a textbook, because I realized this doesn't show you how to actually care for a kid. This doesn't actually show you how to truly respond in a crisis. It tells me steps to follow, but looks very different when I am faced with that situation at a school site. So long-winded response, I think, but really all that to say, these things that were poured into me stuck. And it didn't matter if I wasn't doing a girls group. It didn't matter if I wasn't in a traditional counseling role anymore. I feel like once I got a taste of all that, it didn't ever leave me. I don't think it ever will. I think that just comes out naturally, maybe in different ways. So I'm excited to hear what Gabe has to share. I know you speak very highly of him, and he's not necessarily in that traditional role anymore of education, but I'd be really curious to hear from him about what has stuck with him over time.
I think you'll find that he's a multi-dimensional person. And I was just struck by what you're saying in that we have developed this kind of personality and our likes and our natural talents when we're young, in this social context. And then because of the way that we think about human development, which there's a lot of scholars that have really pushed back on that, and it really doesn't get into kind of the known work right now. There's kind of like a colonial kind of framework built around the idea of human development in some ways. So it's like, it isn't linear, and we are these dimensional creatures. We think for some reason, because we've known about these theories of development in the past, that as soon as we kind of hit adulthood, and like you mentioned, your brain was still growing, our brains are still growing. Now, they're finding that, you can continue to make neurons and all these other things. And we know those of us who are, in that middle age group, like we're still learning and growing. So it's like, then how do we, if we were curious when we were young, and if we did have a passion for helping facilitate, or whatever that is, I was just thinking, Gabby, when you're talking, is there a way that can be the anchor for really going into this uncomfortable space that we're all in right now? Can you go back to what is the passion that you had? What are the things that drive you? What are your natural talents? And, because you chose to be a teacher, that doesn't necessarily mean that you aren't a counselor, or that you aren't a facilitator, or that you aren't this. It's just that you haven't expressed that yet. And our systems make you choose. They make you choose kind of this one dimension of work. And even this way the school is put together, it's kind of this one dimension of, outcomes and teacher evaluation and classroom management. But what if we were to look at it in terms of the fourth dimension? And it's multidimensional, and it, I think about, I'm a Trekkie, so I think about Star Trek. They do chess on these, 4 levels instead of just on one board. What if it was like 4 different dimensions of who you were, and that now in COVID, you can express that. You can follow your curiosities, whatever that leads to, and maybe you reinvent yourself.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I'm excited to hear from Gabe and learn from him and pick his brain a little bit about what we're talking about. How can we be multidimensional? So with that, how about we invite Gabe to our podcast?
And now our special guest.
Welcome, Gabe, to our podcast. I'm so happy to see you and hear from you today. For those folks who may not know you, could you share a little bit about your background with us before we get started?
Yeah, definitely. First off, I want to say hello to Gabby and Lisa here. It's great to chat with you, ladies. I'm a huge fan of the show. I've been listening to your starting episodes here, and I'm loving it. So it's an honor to be on here with you, ladies, to have a nice, fun conversation on your podcast here. So just background. So 13 years, I worked in education, primarily in the world of expanded learning and after school. I worked with the High Tech High organization with both middle school and elementary school. I started before that with the YMCA down in San Diego and didn't know anything about after school programming, had no passion for education. And then I said, I'm just going to do this for a year or two. And fast forward 13 years later, it was the hugest impact on my life is to step into this field of education. And even now that I've stepped out of education, I'm still in education. So that's kind of my background, who I am.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Oh, sorry, Lisa, I was going to say, because sometimes we find that in education, right, that you don't think you're going to land there, and somehow you do. And I don't know, it's the minute we are sometimes interacting with kids, it's like they cast a spell on us, and you think, gosh, I actually really, really enjoy this. So thanks for giving everyone a little bit about your background. We are excited to have you join us today.
I like how you said spell, because that segued in exactly what I was going to say, which is there is this huge mural of Gabe at the school that he was at, where we both worked, just because he cast a spell over all of these kids. And I had the privilege of seeing that in action when we went back to campus. I think it was a year ago, maybe a year and a half. And the students who he had worked with in middle school were now in the high school where we were filming. And they literally just came out like Gabe was the Pied Piper. It was the most amazing thing. And they just gathered around him, and the joy that they had on their faces. I will never forget that. So I think, Gabe, you kind of underrate the spell that you left on those after school kids, and even in the core day kids.
Well, I appreciate that. I had some great kids to work with, so that made my life a lot easier there. They were amazing. And when they unveiled this 8-foot mural of me that is still up on my last day working at the school, I was definitely touched by that moment. It was amazing.
Wow. We can't all say that there's a mural of us at the school. So that's a pretty big honor, I would say. And, Gabe, part of what we do, as you know, as you're an active listener of Two Counselors and a Mic, we always like to ask an opening question of our guests to dig a little bit deeper. And that's our big why question. And so if you're willing to take a risk with us, we'd love to kind of hear from you about what's your why? What is it that landed you kind of where you are today? What was it that transpired for you? What does that look like for you?
Great question, Gabby. And I know, Mike and Shamika answered this so well with like these really deep, thought-provoking, lines. And, I wish I had something like that. I don't. My why is this simple, is when growing up, I had this great childhood, great family, great, experience with education. But there were just a couple pieces that were missing, or a couple things that didn't go as well as I wanted it to. And once I found myself in the world of education and where I'm at now, it was just like, okay, these are the things I wish happened to me. So, why don't provide that for somebody else, for my students, and give them that opportunity to get what I didn't have. So that way they don't grow up saying, oh, it was great, but I wish that. It's that simple right there. Is if I can fill the parts that I didn't have, that's my way to contribute.
So I think Mike did talk a little bit about like things that he didn't have, like, that I remember him saying about why wouldn't I want to go to a regular college counselor? Why are you telling me JC? So what are the things then that you wish, Gabe, in thinking about your life and your journey and sharing that with us, like what were those things that you didn't have?
Well, 2 quick stories come to mind. The first one starts off with a box of cereal. I was in first grade, and I opened up the toy inside of whatever box of cereal I had, and this little like magic box came out. And it's, put a card in there and you can make it disappear. Super cheesy, but I was really intrigued by it. A couple days later, I came home to my mom and I said, hey, in 2 weeks, I'm doing a magic show for my class. And she's like, what? I'm like, yeah, I told my teacher that I'm doing a magic show. I'm a magician. And so my sister's 3 years older than me, is going to be my assistant. And I'm going to go ahead and do a magic show. And so my mom was like, okay, you're doing it. So I put together this 30-minute routine and, went to the library and got some books on magic and learned how to do some tricks and all that. And my mom made me, a little outfit with a little bow tie and a top hat and all that stuff. And, Gabe's magic show. And my sister was my assistant and, put on this show. And for me, it's like, okay, yeah, business as usual, first grade. Yeah, let's rock on this 30-minute performance. And, moving forward from there, every year there was that yearly magic show I do for the school. And then I started getting booked out for other schools and doing this stuff. And so the interesting part was I consider myself as an introvert. Like I love just being by myself, quiet, social situations, just not my best thing. But at that moment in first grade, I realized I can flip this switch and become this extrovert instantly when it's time to like perform, when it's time to, show that side of personality. And so I think with that, I kind of built my reputation as a student. And so comes my first monumental story is going into that first grade year is you're set up as a cross-age tutor, which means an older student from 5th or 6th grade comes down, they become your tutoring buddy. And this was really exciting for me because I was looking for like a really strong mentor that could teach me stuff and someone that I can see on the playground and be like, hey there, cross-age tutor, it's good to see you, and someone to look up to. Mm-hmm. But, now reflecting on it, because I didn't think of it at all when I was a student, I was teamed up with a student that was in 5th, 6th grade that struggled in the classroom and wasn't so much a role model, but more so now I look at it and say I was probably teamed up with that student so I could help them because of my reputation of, I can be organized and pull things together, is I was teamed up to keep this student kind of in line for our activities and projects together. And so I felt that void of like, that's not my role model right there. That's not somebody like I'm looking up to. I'm not learning from this person. And so then fast forward, Lisa and I had this conversation on this long drive we were taking. Then I, after high school, went into film school. And up until that moment, I never had that one teacher that I just really connected with, that one teacher that would, hey, Gabe, how's everything going? And really embraced my curiosities, which in high school, I went to, a standard neighborhood school. And I was once given a book report and I didn't really feel like reading the book. So instead I said, hey, can I just do like a video project about what the book's about? And the teacher's like, oh, that sounds interesting. Yeah. And so I pulled together a few kids, got them out of their book reports. They can help with my book report. And I just flipped the book over and read the paragraph and kind of guessed what the book was going to be about. And then shot a short video to summarize what the book was all about. And, got an A+ on the project. And that was kind of the opening for me getting interested into making videos and film. With that being said, even from that moment, I just didn't have that teacher that connected with me and said, hey, like you are in your beginning stages of high school at a school that's not focused on media. And, I want to push you. I want to be that mentor for you. And unfortunately didn't get that guidance. And so I'm like, okay, go to film school. And we have people that are in the industry teaching you how to, make movies, how to make films. And I'm like, this is my chance to, fill that void and find that person to connect with. And that person say, hey, you're curious about things. I want to embrace you on that. And unfortunately, it was just a huge disappointment. My professors were, active in the industry, so they would skip a lot of classes, and you only had a couple classes a week, an opportunity to be with them. And so they would let you down. And so I think that was one thing that I said, moving forward, I will not let kids down, because that's a bummer, because once you've lost that deposit right there, that's a withdrawal that you can't fill. And so I was in a course with a teacher, and it was tough. Financially, we were kind of in that middle situation where we didn't qualify for any type of financial aid, but we also didn't have tons of money where, paying for school is super easy to do. And so I lived behind a garage in a 1-bedroom type apartment under a condo, where I didn't have a closet, a restroom, washer, dryer. I didn't have a TV, internet, nothing at all. It was just, I have a room, a space that I can call, home for right now. And I'd commute each day 30, 40 minutes to get to school, which was a tough situation as well, because you got to put, gas in the car. It's like, well, financially, how do I do this? And so I was working odd jobs. I was painting factory floors, and I was passing out coupons at Michael's, just anything I could do to make sure we're okay. And for this film class, this was before, the full-on digital age. They had little tapes that you had to record on. And so the tapes cost about, $20, $25 to get at Costco for a set of, 6 or 8 of them. And they only held so much footage on them. And so I would reuse these tapes as much as possible, because that was one more expense. It was, hey, do I eat this week, or do I buy brand new tapes? And so I finished a project and turned it into my professor that I was hoping to have that connection with. And I queued up the tape, 10 minutes into the tape or wherever, where it's a fresh spot on that tape for him to go ahead and watch the project. And I put some notes in there of like, hey, the video is from 10 minutes to, 12 minutes and 30 seconds, whatever that was. And so when it was time to present my project, he put the tape in, put it up on the projector, and then he hit rewind on accident instead of hitting play. Therefore, it rewound and went to like all the rough footage of the project. And he made a huge scene of this in front of the entire class, and basically called me out and said, are you too poor to be able to buy a brand new tape? And I really wanted to be like, oh, I mean, kind of. I mean, like, I'm able to pay to come to film school because of that. It's really tough for me to buy a brand new tape to give to you that you're going to hold on to forever. Like, I'm hoping to get it back so I can reuse it. And so it's just a really negative experience. And once again, just losing another opportunity of finding a mentor. And so I dropped out of film school and just said, hey, maybe this isn't for me. But, found new motivation in life. And I started playing music, and I saw a sign for a Battle of the Bands at a YMCA. And so I'm like, oh, cool. I should go, play this Battle of the Bands. It's close to my parents' house, And so I went, signed up, and played in the event, and made friends with the people that ran the YMCA, which is their teen center, their teen department. And they ultimately offered me a job. And the interview, went something like this. It's, hey, have you ever worked with kids? Nope. Are you interested in working with kids? Maybe they're cool, I had a real bad experience with a cross-age tutor when I was younger. And then it was, hey, but you do video work. I'm like, yeah, yeah. They're like, oh, we need videos to promote the teen center. So, okay, cool. We'll hire you. And that was that. And I was able to learn from some great people. And that was my foot in the door with education, and just kind of went from there.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of the story.
You know, it's interesting because as you were sharing your story, I automatically thought that was the fork in the road, right? That perhaps if that film teacher had had the insight to be more of a mentor, you could have taken a different path. But because of his actions, it actually maybe prompted a direction in the opposite direction. Now, ultimately, we think, well, thank you, film teacher, because here we are, right? But you brought up such great points in that. And I'm thinking, my goodness, something as simple as having empathy and compassion for students that we serve that oftentimes is overlooked. And that teacher didn't have that, right? He missed it on that level, but it was the gain now of those students that you continue to serve. It's been our gain in working with you, right? So I'm glad that it all kind of worked out, but I just kind of envision there's that fork in the road that oftentimes we are a part of and aren't even self-aware at times that we are part of that trajectory for these kids, that it could go either way. And I know the decision is still ultimately theirs, but they can be swayed either way. And so, here, I know everything worked out and it's probably, how it was meant to be. But I think you speak to the importance of needing to really know people's stories and not make an assumption or judge, and definitely never to shame someone because of, the fact that they were reusing a tape. I think, oh my goodness, how silly of that teacher's perspective, so limited, right? I also think it's interesting that you had never worked with kids. Oftentimes, I find those are the best out of school time people, and they make honestly the best teachers, because you think, it's not really for me, but you do have this gift. Some people just naturally have this affinity to connect with youth and then to bring in the talents that help build bridges with kids. And so I could see why they would be really attracted to working with you, because you've got a really unique skill set that I know a lot of young people are interested in, because they think, oh, this is cool what he gets to do. And he's in the biz. Like, I want to learn more about that. And so I think it's great that it ended up working out that way. And I could see how you could leverage that skill set in working with young people.
Well, I appreciate that, Gabby. Hey, I got a sneak peek on one of your guys' episodes coming up here with Marissa Allen. And a big piece you mentioned, Gabby, was that at times we put students in these boxes and just say, this is you, this is how it is. And I think that was a big mold, because it's funny, because I was not put in that box of like, hey, he's really behind, or hey, he doesn't pay attention, or he needs extra support. It was, no, like, he does the magic shows. He's fine. Just let him be on his own. Let's put him with students that are struggling there so he can help to teach them. And, what the teachers didn't realize is that, I was looking for that mentorship myself. I was looking to be pushed. I was looking for someone to say, hey, he's really curious about a lot of other things. Let's embrace that right there. Mm-hmm. And so I think, not intentionally, but when I stepped into the world of High Tech High working with Lisa, I was given this opportunity to almost get a college education from the kids, like them kind of pushing me to be like, we want to learn more. Can you go learn more? So it's like, oh, cool. You guys want to learn how to build websites? All right, give me a couple of weeks here. I'm going to learn how to build websites, and we're going to do this together. Oh, you guys want to learn cartoon animation? Yeah, we can definitely learn how to use Flash and all that stuff. Give me a couple of weeks. We'll get back to that. And then just taking that position. And once again, it was never intentional. I was never like, I'm going to change the lives of students by being able to affect each one. It was just, hey, like, it really stunk for me that though I was in a situation where like I did really well in school, I wasn't embraced. I wasn't able to find that mentor, kind of push those curiosities to be able to give back, in a sense where there's the student that wants to be the sports star. Okay, cool. Let's embrace that. And there's a student that wants to make, the video projects. Let's embrace that. And there's a student that wants to, do Dungeons and Dragons. Let's do that. And there's a student that's like, I just want to tell you stories all the time. Awesome. And I think giving that opportunity to me was able to give that opportunity to the students. So though mine was negative and there was a void, I was able to go ahead and say, hey, you're not going to experience that. And just to be on a mission where on the weekends it was studying the yearbook. So that way I know everyone's name. So that way they always felt like, cool, that guy, I can always wave at him, no matter if I'm the sports star or if I'm the quiet, introverted student. He's going to say hi to me. He's going to know something about me. And if I'm interested, we're going to find a way to explore that. And that was cool. Never intentional. Like, no way was I like, I'm going to change. It just kind of happened that way. And it was fun for me to be like, hey, I get to go back to middle school as an adult now, right? But I get to kind of do all the things that I wanted to do with the students and let them do it also.
Well, and that's why there's an 8-foot mural of you.
There is I think what you're saying is you may not deliberately, with like a visible intention to go out and change the world, like you said. But I'm just, as you were talking, I recall we were at Warner Springs, and I have had the privilege of going with Gabe and doing some ethnography, ethnovideographic work at our different schools in San Diego. And we're at Warner. It was the first one. I said, Gabe, come out, to Warner. It's just such a beautiful drive. And, we have a lot of kids that are living on the reservations up there in that area. It's a very rural community. And Gabe, he's a tall guy. So, when he has his equipment on, he's very visible. And I'll never forget, and I'm contextualizing it now that you're saying this. There was this young girl that, doesn't know Gabe, doesn't know what we're doing, but she was interested in what he was doing. And at the end of this really short little conversation, that Gabe was just such a kind person. She was like, oh, I take pictures. And Gabe's like, well, yeah, that's great. Show me. And she literally went back and she got her camera. And I think like you were just sitting there, looking at her pictures and giving her such like micro mentorship in that small amount of time. So even though you say that there's not an intention, I think that is because that's who you are. Like it's just systemic in every interaction that you have, Gabe. And I just wonder, did you, after that experience in film school, did you receive the mentorship, or has the mentorship been through an unlikely source, which might be the kids themselves?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, like I said, like the kids were like my education right there. Those kids weren't going to let me down. They were going to be there every single day. And as long as I showed up, they were going to show up. And no matter what the project was, we were going to get it done together. And that's what made it such a tough decision to walk away from education. But I think, once again, not intentional. But that was the mission is, hey, guys, we've been here for each other for all these years, and I've seen you grow. And now it's my next steps to grow. And I want to be able to be that mentor that I was looking for, to say, hey, this is something that I still want to do with my life. And I cannot give you 100% that I'm giving you right now if I'm going to try to focus on this piece over here. And made a very difficult choice to step away and start my own video production company. But it's been wonderful where families and students have been able to connect through social media and then also through email, and to be able to, hear these stories and say, well, hey, my teacher who said these are the things I still want to do with my life is doing that. So can I. To be able to give them a story of like, we just don't talk about it. We do things, we follow through. And I think it's been beneficial to continue on. And now to be able to be in a position where I've also connected with Ray Trinidad, who has stepped into that mentor role for me. And he's a consultant that does, a ton of stuff on after school programming, expanded learning. He's been able to give me an opportunity to get back into education when I'm not doing all the video production stuff, and to also teach and run activities and work with both youth and adults. And so it's been a great mix of where life is now. And for my students, my kiddos, to like go back and say, oh, that was Mr. Gabe, and now he's doing this, and now I want to go do that someday. I have a student who had special needs and just graduated high school, and his mom reached out and said, can my student have your phone number? So yeah, of course. Yeah. So, we had to set a couple, ground rules, but he'll call me once a week because he was adamant about working with Disney someday. And so he just got into a program for students with special needs that'll get them into media. And so he called me once a week just to tell me about his classes and all that stuff. But it's one of those things where I feel like, though I've stepped away, like still fully there for all those kids.
Well, and I don't know if you stepped away, in hearing, because you actually said, like leaving education. And it's interesting because a lot of the projects surrounding you are actually education focused. A lot of the projects that you've worked on with Lisa, the podcast contributions, really it's all connected. And so I would like to go on a limb and say you actually haven't left education, maybe not in that formal way that you were in it before, but clearly you're still in a position and you remain open and humble. When you mentioned earlier, I don't know what it is. And I thought, I know what it is. It's humility. It's the fact that you're just a good person wanting to provide something to someone, not because there's any personal gain on your end. That's humility. You're just, coming from a good perspective to help. You didn't have to give your number to this kid, right? You're not part of a formal school or program. It's just you being a good guy. And that student has gravitated towards you because there's something that you have that he needs, right? And it's just that connection. So you are still very much an educator, Gabe. I know you run your own company, but I think once you've gotten the exposure to education and you realize, hey, I'm kind of good at this, I don't think it ever leaves you. As much as you may try, we're going to always find ways to connect you and circle back to education, because you do have a very unique perspective and lens. And I want to make sure we cultivate that and continue to pick your brain. I'm glad Ray has provided opportunities, because even just hearing you talk about your experience as a child, where your parents gave you the ability to, you want to be a magician, great. I think that type of creativity, even just the storytelling in that, is huge for our teachers to hear, or our after school staff to hear. You don't have to always have a beautifully crafted lesson. Sometimes it's just allowing them to be in their space. And like you've been saying, they will come to you with ideas about their own learning. We just have to nurture it one way or another and not shut it down, right? It's so I love when you shared about, oh, they want to do this. Okay, let me figure it out. I love that. I actually never heard you say no in that story. It was, okay, how do we figure it out? Give me some time and we'll do. I absolutely love that.
Well, Gabby, I appreciate the kind words on that for sure. And I also appreciate just you breaking that down for me. Wow. Like, I feel like I normally get charged $100 an hour just to have that breakdown on life there. So
we also offer some therapy here on the podcast.
Yeah,
You
I
can
appreciate
put it
it.
on mic. Come on.
I know. Let me know what your PayPal is. I'll take care of you on that one there. But you know what, Gabby, everything you said is totally spot on, except for one small thing, is it wasn't always about letting the students come to you, because that was definitely one holdback that I had. It was going up to a teacher and saying, hey, are you interested in, making films and cameras? Like, I was scared to do that. Like, that was like a very intimidating piece for me, even though on the outside I look, scary and go-getter and introverted and magic shows. Like, that part was very terrifying for me, even to this point in my life. But the part that I wanted to change when I stepped into education is to go look for that student who's just sitting at the table by themselves, and to know that, yeah, I'm going to sacrifice my break time. I'm not going to Starbucks today. But to go over there and just, start a conversation for them to be like, dude, that guy was super random, just talking about weird stuff. But now next time I see that student in the hallway, I'm going to know their name. We're going to have a connection, and we're going to refer back to this conversation. And now that door is open to say, hey, what are you interested in? And, you're known. Your name is known. You're not just a student sitting by yourself at a table. Is now you're known by an adult. And that's the starting point right there. Mm-hmm. And so there definitely is that effort on that side. That part was definitely intentional, where it was every day I worked a minimum of 11.5 hours a day at that school. And a lot of people be like, man, that's a long day. But that's just 11.5 hours of opportunity to be in classrooms, to be at break, to be at lunch with the students, to set up a meeting every single day. So that way, whether we're doing a project with Lisa Davis, or if we're doing a project for sports, if we're doing a project for a club, whatever it is, just more opportunities for the students to say, hey, I have an adult to connect with, which I think is very important, that the adult takes the lead on that, not saying, hey, I have an open door. That's awesome. But do you leave that open door to make sure students know they can come to this open door?
Mm-hmm. And I just want to say, like, a lot of people might say, oh yeah, okay, this sounds like too good to be true. It's opportunities, 11.5 hours, and it's a time for opportunity. No, Gabe really means that. Like, Gabe really means that that's 11.5 hours of learning, self-learning, helping kids learn. It's just the dedication. And I feel here, you might not call yourself a teacher, and you may not have the credential of a teacher. And this is not to, limit that for our colleagues that do have credentials. But you, for me, Gabe, are the epitome of what anybody would call a teacher. And I'm moved to tears right now because you really are, Gabe. Every single thing I think teachers should try to emulate from the experiences that you've had with not being able to have that mentor, but being constantly that person who sees relationships with kids, how that's going to affect them as adults. You see that very clearly. And that is teaching. That is facilitating. That's counseling. You're like the whole package.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. I appreciate that. I will say I can't take credit for a lot of it because my position at High Tech was the after school guy, but willing to say yes to other opportunities, helping out inside the classroom or so, where I had that opportunity to go watch genius teachers, brilliant teachers do their thing and just start to kind of pick and pull little pieces of what everybody else was doing. At a young age, I was put in situations where disciplinary scenarios came up, and somehow I got myself into that room with some great deans from high schools that have seen some really major situations. And I met Ray Trinidad at a young age when I was 19, and I was actually hired to do a video for him. And so I wasn't there to do anything with education. It was, hey, can, this guy come out and do this video? And Ray just started talking, and I was just mesmerized by it. He talked about students, and he said, tell me which student out of this entire group is going to make it. Who is it that I should focus on and pay attention to and embrace? Which student? Show me which one it is, and I will go and put all my eggs into that basket. And if you can't do that right now, then I'm going to help every single student here and be here for every single student. And I was videotaping, but I just stopped. And I was like, where was this guy when I was at school, Where was this guy to come up and be like, hey, what's up, Gabe? How's it going, man? What's up with that video stuff? Like, you need somebody like that in your life. And just to be able to be surrounded by, great people and to learn from them. And then Lisa, once I crossed paths with you and to see someone who will go so far to make sure there's so many opportunities behind the scenes. Lisa, you're like the lady that's like, I don't need the credit. I don't want the spotlight, but boy, am I going to change your life and am I going to give you opportunities. And when those kids hit internship in 11th grade, to know there's going to be such a great opportunity. And I know you and I talked about once we both stepped away from that organization, had other opportunities in life, a couple parents reached out and said, hey, my student is looking for an internship and this is where they're being placed right now. What do you think about this? And my first phone call was to you, Lisa, to be like, well, hey, let me talk to Lisa really quick. And you had some great feedback of like, well, no, are we thinking about these angles? And that student was able to find a new internship, which is the student that now calls me every single day or every single week. And it led to his media background. And I'm like, man, Lisa, unintentionally, like you didn't go out and say, hey, this kid's really into Disney, media is the background that he needs. It was like, no, there's this one small chance where we're going to take that step and work in the background like that. And Lisa, you didn't need the credit for it. You didn't need an award for it. You just did your thing. And, through the trickle effect, the ripple effect, whatever thing's called, I don't know. You changed that kid's life. And I feel that's awesome.
Right back at you, man. Okay, so this is you have one more question, Gabby, did you?
No. I was going to actually just say that I think both of you, what you do really well is you'll take an idea or a seed that might be planted, whether that's from a colleague like Ray or a kid that might plant an idea. And what I know from Lisa and now what I'm learning from you, Gabe, is that you both would take a small little thought or idea and literally you have this magic and you blow it up. You find ways to take something small and say, boom, how do we make it bigger? And I think that ties into what Lisa and I have been talking about for a while now, is that learning is expanding. And whether or not you like it, it's happening and you can't control it, and it's not a bad thing. And so we've got one last question for you that I think would be important for us to end with, because it connects really kind of where we're hoping to be down the road. So I'll let you set that up, Lisa.
If you can change education, if you are looking at education 5 to 10 years, what does it look like for you? What does it need to look like?
I'm going to start with the 1-year plan, because I had a new client the other day and I stopped into the office to meet with him one-on-one. And in his waiting room, he had his staff write just inspirational quotes on Post-its. They put them on the wall. And so I read one, and I'm not like a quote person or anything like that. And I'm going to just paraphrase it because I don't even know exactly what is verbatim. But the quote was something to the effect of, everyone needs a good setback before they can make a major comeback. I'm like, oh, that's totally it. I mean, that's every movie, every great Disney movie, because things have to be difficult before they become easy. And looking at our 1-year plan right now is we are going through horrible times on Earth. But man, this is our setback right here. And to say, what's education going to look like in 10 years? It's going to be awesome, because we need this major setback so that way we can start to expand and build this, in school, after school. It's seamless. It's just opportunity for students. And what a great setup for a comeback to say, okay, everyone go home. We're going to explore, what does it look like for distance learning? What does it look like having smaller class sizes? What does it look like not just stacking books of homework and papers and all of that? What does it like to be like, hey, we're only going to learn for a couple hours and then we want you to go spend time with your family? What does that look like? And what an opportunity to be almost forced into this setback so that we can start to build this comeback. I don't know what education is going to look like, but if I could give a hope, it's going to be a situation where every student walking in is going to have time to be with their families, is going to have time to develop their curiosities, is going to have a mentor to say, hey, what are your curiosities? How can I help you? To be in an environment that like, hey, if you try to train a fish to run a marathon, he's never going to win. But if you put him in the water to swim, he's going to go so fast. And to say, hey, maybe that the 4 walls and the straight desks and the bells that tell you every hour you're going to every single class, and then just, only certain kids can go into after school. Maybe that's all going to be gone. It's just going to say, hey, we're just in an environment where, you like to do stuff with your hands outside. We're going to put you, with your hands outside. And if there's something that's not available during the school day, after school, we're going to find a way to say, hey, yeah, you want to do cartoon animation? We're going to figure out how to do cartoon animation with you after school.
It is such a timely thing. Gabby and I have been talking a lot about how life gives you setbacks or uncomfortability, but yet there's such tremendous growth that happens, and it's hard to see it, but you absolutely just hit the nail on the head. Because if we can then, through this podcast, talking about our stories, provide kind of this ability for people to see it's really not a setback. It's just the earth, the universe, complex systems way of resetting so that we can grow. And Gabe, it's just every time I work with you, every time I hear you speak, I just appreciate you more and more. Thank you for inspiring us, helping us along this journey to do this podcast. I hope I call you my friend, and I truly appreciate you.
Likewise, for sure. Lisa, it's been great to have you in my life. Gabby, it's been such an honor to get to work with you now. I love the show. Keep on going on, you guys. I think hearing the stories, talking about education, it's step 1 to this great comeback. So thank you for what you ladies are doing. I appreciate it. And I will talk to you guys very soon.
And now our closing thoughts.
That was awesome. I like him a lot. He's just such a man. I know he found his other passion, but there's so many things, like he's got all these talents, I think. And man, he'd be awesome in an after school program. He'd be awesome being a film teacher at a high school. I'm thinking, gosh, there's a lot that he could do, because he's that unique type of person that he's got these multiple skills. So
I was really drawn to his conversation about when he was young, because I resonated with him a little bit. Like I was never bad in school. I was just kind of, average, I would say. And I always, reflecting now, I always wish there would have been somebody that would have, been like, oh, you could do this, and push me. And I have to just speak a little bit about this High Tech High experience, because I feel like what he was saying, it really resonated with me. So Gabe and I both worked at High Tech High, and we both kind of I started my journey because my oldest child was accepted at High Tech High Chula Vista. And so we both live in Chula Vista at the time. Gabe has since moved on. But what was really interesting about those years that I spent at High Tech High Chula Vista is that we were all local, A lot of us were first gens that were staff and teachers, and it was just quite a remarkable ecosystem of learning. And I say that because I could see in him exactly what happened to me. I always had this curious mind in school. I always wished that I had this mentorship. And what Gabe was speaking to was really about this idea that we're kind of thinking through and putting forth when we talk about learning is expanding, about teachers becoming learners, about the culture and community of a school being this constant incubator of learning. Because I can tell you, Gabby, I am not the same person just intellectually. It affected me profoundly. And I don't think that the high-tech high framework that we think about, for those of you who don't know, project-based learning school, it has, specific tenets around equity and things like teacher voice. That to me wasn't high-tech high Chula Vista. It was this learning incubator for people like myself and Gabe who want to continue to learn and grow, and doing that with our students as not an adult and a child, but as a co-learner. And when you see that in action, I feel like you can physically see the little light bulbs going up, and the students are, the whole collaborative learning environment is different than school. And I saw that in parents where, I had a parent that told me high-tech high is not just transforming, I should say high-tech high Chula Vista is not just transforming my student, it's transforming my family. And for low-income people that are first gens that do not have those experiences, to me, this was like a candy store of just intellectual curiosities and pursuits. And I could see that same thing happening with Gabe.
Yeah, and what's nice is that you both had a site where the leadership cultivated that, because oftentimes, people have different experiences, of course, but you might come with an idea and off the bat it's no, we've always done it this way, or no, that sounds like it's too out of the box, or no, that just sounds like that's going to be too much work. And sometimes I wonder, do people not even ask because they're afraid of that rejection, and that they almost just revert back to, well, it's not even worth the trouble. It's different when you have the leadership that, the way that you and Gabe were able to grow there. It's because you were part of a culture that was the norm, right? The growing and the putting out an idea. We hear that quite a bit about, big companies like Google, where it's like they're actually expected to fail. That's part of their growth process, is that you put together, new tools that may or may not work, but the whole point is to figure out and refine things. And you can't do that if you don't give people the opportunity to be creative and try something new. And I think in education, we want to do that, but structurally, I think it's scary in our field to do that, because we think, well, you're talking about the impact on kids, and when it's not known, that may not work well. I think it's difficult in our field to just be completely free. That hasn't been necessarily part of the fabric of education. It's been much more prescriptive, because we know, well, you want it to be based on something that works. Obviously, you don't want to just say, just do whatever. You want it to be based on evidence-based practices that we know are effective for kids. But there is room in that for that teacher and educator, practitioner, counselor, et cetera. There's room for their growth as part of this overall process. So you and Gabe actually, I think, are very lucky. I'm not quite so sure that's the norm. I would love it to be for other school sites and other programs. And maybe COVID was actually going to push us to lean more in that direction of, you have to be open to doing things differently, because we're forced to do it. We were forced to do it differently. And we probably would not have without a pandemic. We would not have just embraced Zoom. I mean, in the beginning, I think we were all tired of it, and we had Zoom fatigue, and, but I sit here and I think, there's times when it is more effective and more efficient, especially for those of us who are caring for others in our home or have some other stressors in our life, to say, I can't get in a car and drive 45 minutes to a school site right now when I've got, I have to be available for my mom or my kid. So, right, people love it or hate it, there's a space for it now. It just is nice to hear from you and Gabe how you had an experience that did transform you. And I wish that other people could be open to that, to allow that for others. I think that would be that'd be amazing if we could do that.
I think it goes back to what Marisa Allen was saying, and, this idea of constructive risk taking too. Because really, as administrators, we need to have those constructive risk takers, the ones that can really see that, yes, we need to have, these learning outcomes, but that then when we create a professional learning community, and we use those words, I don't think in the true sense of the term, it is a culture, it's a cultural community and of learning, really of looking at all of us as just continuing to learn. And we're so driven by this linear way of thinking about development that it really blinds us to the fact that we're constantly learning. So amazing person that Gabe is, really moving the work forward. And hopefully what our listeners will get from this is now is the time. Now is the time to start thinking and creating and being curious and learning. Because learning is expanding, Gabby.
It sure is.
And that's it for Two Counselors and a Mic. I'm Lisa.
And I'm Gabby. Thanks for listening.